Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your host, Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello, and welcome back to another edition of the Stronger Than Steel podcast. John Keir with you as always, and joining me is my co-host, Austin Davidson.
Heyo.
It is Season 4, Episode 19. We're talking Steelers football today, Austin, and we got a game coming up on Friday. We're currently recording on late evening of August 6th, which is a Tuesday, so Steelers football just 3 days away, and a lot to get into. You know, we'll be talking about our game previews shortly here. It's going to be a little different than, the way we all come to expect previewing games, talking about the Steelers and talking about their opponents. But because it's the preseason, there really isn't a whole lot to discuss when it comes to the Buccaneers. So it's going to be a little bit different. We've got something new that we're going to be trying today. So bear with us on that, and we'll kind of introduce and talk about it as we get there. But the first thing I want to get to today, we're talking about training camp as we continue to progress through it. Only a few practices left. Today was really the first really bad bumps and bruises kind of day from practice. I mean, you've had injuries mounting throughout training camp, as will be the case with any camp. But today there were a bunch of injuries. There were actually 5 players noted by head coach Mike Tomlin as far as players that actually left with injury distinctions, and 2 other players who left practice that were not mentioned by Tomlin. So just getting to those players right away, that's Alejandro Villanueva, who has a right shoulder or arm that was bandaged up. Bud Dupree has an unknown injury. Dante Moncrief has the ongoing finger injury that he re-aggravated. Sutton Smith, the outside linebacker, has an unknown injury, and cornerback Justin Lane, the last 2 rookies, also an unknown injury. And 2 other players that left practice were running back Ralph Webb and tight end long snapper Trevor Wood. So of those 7 names, we don't really know a whole lot of what's going on, but just one of those unfortunate days where you actually have a pretty big number of players that were injured.
Yeah, it's pretty rough, too, because 3 of them are projected starters with Big Al, Bud Dupree, and Dante Moncrief, so it was a pretty rough day.
And as is the case with any practice or game of football, you're going to have a lot of injuries. You have a higher chance for injury the more you practice. So, again, that's always the thing that coaches are always trying to balance with these days. But it's just, there's really nothing you can do. It happens. And I would be shocked if any of those guys played this week. Certainly not the starters, but it depends on how serious the injuries are to the rookies. These are the games that you really want guys like Smith and Lane to be playing, and guys that aren't expected to play much during the regular season. These reps are more important now than ever. So you really hope that you can see them come back. On the positive front, though, we did have a bunch of players that were either returning in full or returning in a limited fashion, including, of course, T.J. Watt. Center guard J.C. Hassenauer, who returned after suffering a knee injury during the last practice. Christian Scotland Williamson returned after a groin injury. Artie Burns returned from a groin injury. Vince Williams participated. I actually don't think he participated. If he did, it was only in limited fashion with a hamstring injury. Sean Davis continues to be out with a finger injury. And Deontay Johnson, who originally had a hip injury, also has a groin injury. So, just bumps and bruises, which, we're all accustomed to this time of year, but you hope, obviously, that none of them are severe, and you hope that the younger players especially can get healthy quicker so they can get the most important reps that they need this time of year.
So, just to cut in, Sean Davis actually returned in part today. He was in full pads today.
Okay, so he did return in a limited fashion. I still would be shocked if he plays this week, and probably he might only play in one preseason game.
Yeah, he's a starter, and there's no one really replacing him, so he really shouldn't play that much, even if he's not the best starter that the Steelers have.
One guy who had a very quick stint on the active roster, it's already over. It's Derek Thomas, the cornerback, who was just signed earlier this past week to replace the injured Herb Waters, who is now on the reserve injured list for a shoulder injury he suffered. Thomas got injured just yesterday and now all of a sudden has suffered the same fate. He is been waived in favor of cornerback Jermaine Ponder, who was originally an undrafted free agent signed by the Browns in May. Thomas is expected to pass through waivers and revert to the reserve injured list, similar to Waters, but might take an injury settlement as well. So more shuffling at the cornerback position here, and for guys like Thomas and now especially Ponder being picked up so late in the process, it's going to be tough for these guys to make the roster. Not impossible, but it makes an uphill climb even more difficult to reach the top.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the adding to the cornerback, I feel like the Steelers don't really know what they wanted to, like, the last set of cornerbacks, so Jermaine Ponder just kind of adds to it to give more competition for, like, the fringe guys like Brian Allen and Artie Burns. Just some extra competition at the end of the roster.
Any other injury notes that we might be missing here?
As far as I know, no.
All right. News and notes, the big news as we get into the preseason here, of course, this time of year is contract extensions. We already know that the Steelers have been in the middle of negotiations with cornerback Joe Hayden. They've been going well, reportedly. I would expect the deal to be done before opening day, but at the same time, I would not expect the deal to be done before Joe Hayden is complete with his preseason playing time. You don't want to sign guys to contracts and have them get injured in the preseason. So if I were betting my money, I feel like that's what they're waiting on. I feel like there is a deal in place, though.
Oh yeah, I think it's going to be upwards of like 11.3 million, somewhere like there per year, and I think it's going to happen about where you said. It's probably going to happen just before week 1, where we know that Joe Hayden isn't injured.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't his cap hit right now 11.9 million, or no? Maybe it is 11.3.
It's somewhere around there. It's somewhere close.
Well, either way, he's due for a pay raise.
Oh, yes, sir.
He's due $10 million this year. I need to do more research as far as how much money he probably could make. I have to imagine he's going to make upwards of $11 million. You know, his first year in Pittsburgh, he only made his base salary was just it was actually $1.25 million. That's it.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy.
And his signing bonus. So this is one of those rare instances where the backloaded contract actually does see the end. Very interesting. Well, in any case, with Hayden being the first domino to fall in the extensions, the next guy in line, according to Jerry Dulac, he tweeted today that nose tackle Javon Hargrave is next at the checkout counter, and I honestly can't think of a better name to be following Joe Hayden in terms of a guy that the Steelers would really want. And we've already talked about why Hargrave's deal will probably be more difficult to complete, but it's one that you hope the Steelers get started on sooner rather than later.
Oh, yeah. I feel like Javon Hargrave is a very important part of this team. I'm still not convinced the deal is going to get done, though. I have a bad feeling about Javon Hargrave. I feel like the values are going to be very far off. I just got bad feelings. I don't think Javon Hargrave is going to be a Steeler after this next season. Now,
I know you've already talked about Stephon Tuitt a lot in previous years, especially this year, I should say, in previous months. You've talked about how he could be a potential cap casualty, and this is still a little ways down the road, but if the Steelers were to pay Javon Hargrave, I think like $11 million a year, which is probably around where players of his caliber would be paid as interior defensive linemen, you'd be tying up just under $40 million in your starting 3 defensive linemen, which you can do, but that's, you're really hamstringing yourself elsewhere when you consider guys like James Conner and Juju Smith-Schuster still need to be paid. I don't know. I know the Steelers are very good at usually keeping players. They're good players, keeping them in town, but I think a guy like Stephon Tuitt, his contract may make it may have to be a him or Hargrave kind of thing. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand, because T.J. Watt's on the horizon, too, since he came from the same draft class as Juju, and edge rushers and wide receivers are some of the most expensive positions. Running back, I'm not worried about. James Conner, I think, no matter what, is coming back, because the running back market right now is still trash. I still don't see I can't see James Conner be pulling a Le'Veon Bell where he's from the city and stuff, and I don't know. It's just I don't think it's going to go down the same way. I'm worried about Juju and TJ Watt because they're gonna need big contracts, like $19 million basically each. So that's going to be pretty rough because by the time they get paid, that's where the markets are going to be. The wide receiver market's already at $19 million for the top wide receiver. Edge rusher keeps going up and up and up. So Stephon Tuitt easily could be a target, but the Steelers need to find a replacement defensive lineman first because then they could honestly probably trade Tuitt. Tuitt's still worth. He's not worth his value exactly in my mind, but I feel like they could still get something out of him. I don't know. I feel like you could trade him if they found a defensive lineman that could step up in his place.
Well, here's the thing: you're not finding someone right now. You'd really need to find someone really, really good, and even then, the idea is to win now. So you wouldn't trade him now. But the problem is, if you don't trade him now, if Hargrave gets that close to testing free agency, unless if you slap the franchise tag on him, I have to imagine he's going to test free agency.
Oh yeah, I could actually see them putting the franchise tag on him though. They'll think he's worth it.
I would right now. I mean, we're months away from that being a possibility, but that's what I would do right now, based on the way things appear to be breaking down. But in any case, there's still negotiations to be had, and who knows? Maybe the Steelers could actually sign him to a deal before the season starts, and this could all just be water under the bridge. But in any case, just something to make note of. The Steelers' first official depth chart, and I say it that way because it really doesn't mean anything. There hasn't been a game played yet, so it's certainly not set in stone. But just a few interesting things to note. One, the biggest thing I noted is that Gerald Hawkins was dropped to the third team I think it's right tackle position or left tackle. I think it's left tackle. And Zach Banner has taken his place on the second team offensive line. That's really the only major takeaway. I mean, there are certain things to look and make note of, but again, we're not going to know much until the games are played.
Yeah, these depth charts mostly revolve around the veterans. This depth chart is always just released kind of by force because teams have to release depth chart before their first preseason game. So it has a lot of like the last season starters and veterans above everyone else. Just like some things to note, like Justin Lane is behind Brian Allen and stuff, so it's not exactly the greatest list. I mean, granted, Brian Allen could be maybe still impressing, but I feel like the rookies gotta be having the edge here. But based on where they were drafted and how Brian Allen's performed, but regardless, I would take this depth chart with a grain of salt.
As should we all. So, unless if there's anything else any other news and notes that were on your mind. I think we can proceed. Is there something that you're itching to talk about?
No, but first, before we go into the segment, I got a quarter. So just to flip a coin for who goes first on this segment, if you want to call heads or tails right now.
Now, wait. There's no... But before we even get into that, let me introduce this new segment, if you will. So for any football fans or listeners of this podcast who watch or listen to Pro Football Talk, or even if you don't, they have a segment where they do a draft every day of various topics. So yesterday, or I guess this morning, they did a draft on players that were better or had their best moments of their careers with the second team they played for, not the first. And it's between Mike Florio and Chris Sims, or whoever's opposite Mike Florio that day. So I forget exactly who it was, but I think Florio had like Brett Favre because of his couple years with the Vikings, Jerome Bettis with the Steelers after starting his career with the Rams, and Kurt Warner. I don't know who Kurt Warner played for originally. I think it might have been Green Bay, and I know he obviously ended up with the Rams. And then Chris Sims had Steve Young, who started his career with the Buccaneers before going to the 49ers. He had
Drew Brees. Drew Brees.
Drew Brees going from the Chargers to the Saints, and then I'm forgetting the third one as well. Do you remember?
The third one I don't remember. I remembered Steve Young and Drew Brees.
Well, regardless, the point is that they do drafts on a variety of topics, and I thought that might be something fun that Austin and I can do instead of just going right through, position by position. What are we talking about? What's going to be exciting? So today we're going to have our first draft. I think I'm cool with going 5 rounds because it's just back and forth. We'll have 10 players that we're going to be most paying attention to in this game and maybe have the most on the line. So it is just one preseason game. Remember, there's no roster cut down to 75, so if you have a bad performance in this preseason game, it isn't the end of the world, but at the same time, it is important that you perform well at some point because you're running out of chances. So, as far as the whole coin flipping thing goes, Austin, I'm okay with you doing it this time, but the fact of the matter is there's no way for me to know if you're not cheating or not. Not that I don't trust you, but you see what I'm saying.
My word for it here. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, okay. We'll figure out something in the future, but this is just kind of something I came up with just a few hours ago, so it's something I want to try. So we're going to go 5 players each as far as who we think has the most, guys that we're going to have our eyes on and think that have the most to gain or lose by their performance on Friday. So, Austin, I'm going to call heads. Feel free to flip the coin.
All right, caught it in the air, flipped it, and it is heads, so you get to go first. That sucks. This is why it was important, because I think we both have the same number 1, I would hope, or I would think.
I don't know. I actually have a bunch of different guys here, and I actually had trouble ranking them. I'm actually going to go with Deontay Spencer at number 1 for me, the wide receiver. So Spencer, I'm just making sure I'm typing this in for official record. Deontay Spencer I'm taking first, the wide receiver. Look, it's going to be tough for for this guy to make the Steelers. We've seen guys with this mold and Eli Rogers and Ryan Switzer, guys that are short and shifty, but Spencer has legit wheels. The problem is there's not a clear path onto the roster. They're keeping 6 receivers, but we were talking last episode. It's going to be Rogers, Switzer, and Spencer most likely competing for 2 spots, and if Rodgers is taking the lead on Switzer, that means that Spencer's best shot at making this team is to jump Switzer, and that means he has to really, really excel at special teams, and what I mean by that is being a returner. So Ryan Switzer's calling card in the NFL has been as a returner, and that's going to be Spencer's ticket to making the team. Now, you might remember Trey Williams, who played for the San Antonio Commanders in the AAF and was on the Steelers preseason roster 2 years ago. Returned to punt for a touchdown, but it wasn't enough to keep him on the roster. So I think Spencer's not only going to need to show, something on offense. I mean, he's got legit talent for sure, but it's going to really come down to what he can do in the special teams game. Can he run a kick for a touchdown? Can he run a punt back for a touchdown? Can he show that he is more dynamic than Ryan Switzer? And this is the type of game where you need to do it, where it's all wild, flying around, a lot of moving parts, a lot of younger players. You need to be able to show that you can do something. Stephon Logan did it 10 years ago. He's still kicking around in the CFL. Maybe a former CFL counterpart in Deontay Spencer can do it. He is my first pick for guys that I'm watching, guys that have most to lose and most to gain. So that's my number 1 pick, Deontay Spencer.
I'm interested. I really thought that we were both going to have Devin Bush, but I'm going to take Devin Bush here because, come on, he's the first overall pick. He is the one I'm going to be watching most of this game, and I kind of alluded to it at the end of the podcast. Sorry if that was confusing, by the way, when to the listeners. When I said linebacker versus linebacker battle at the end of last podcast or whatever I said, I was talking about Devin White versus Devin Bush because that was what I was going to be watching in this game. It's going to be a tough because some people have argued that Devin Bush was the better player in this draft, even though Devin White went first. And I'm honestly one of those people. Everyone knows, if you paid attention to the Inside Linebacker review that we had pre-draft process, that I wasn't the biggest fan of Devin White. And while I didn't get to look at Devin Bush, I trusted John's judgment on him. So I was higher on Devin Bush than I was Devin White. And so he's going to be the player I'm focusing on. What I'm really looking for here is how vocal he is. I found that one of his problems, or that's been reported, that he's not being vocal enough with his play calling and stuff. I want to see how he is if he were to be in the seat of calling plays. That's probably not going to happen, especially in his rookie year. But I want to see what happens when he's in control, when he is one of the guys that has to be a leader early on or being forced into these hard positions. And then I'm just going to be watching just to see how he does. Come on, it's the first overall pick that the Steelers traded up for. like all the way up to the 10th pick, I'm going to be looking out for Devin Bush and seeing how he does in this game. So that's my number one. And I guess for fun, I'll just say I had Deontay Spencer on my list as well. Deontay Spencer was my 6th. So I just figured I'd throw that out there. But yeah, my number one is Devin Bush.
I actually did not have Devin Bush on my list. Now, I just want to say that I was erring. I didn't really explain. Again, this is the first time we're doing this. But I was just kind of thinking the whole time, for me, it was who has the most to gain and who has most to lose. The whole time, I never thought, the whole time I was just thinking Devin Bush is going to be playing at some point this year. Even if he doesn't play well in the preseason, I'd be shocked if he doesn't see the field. So that's just kind of where I was coming from. But I definitely am not going to argue with you in terms of paying attention to Devin Bush. That's where most Steelers fans are probably going to have their eyes on, and they really should. So I can't disparage you for picking Devin Bush. My second pick is going to be safety Cameron Kelly, the backup right now, competing with Jordan Dangerfield to be the backup free safety. These are two guys that are kind of polar opposites in terms of what they provide at free safety. Jordan Dangerfield is a downhill, hard-hitting safety who plays kind of like a strong safety but has experience at both, and he's a good special teams player. Cameron Kelly's a little more rangy. He's not super fast, but he's more athletic. He's a better ball-hawking guy, maybe not as great on special teams. Look, Kelly has taken full advantage of the fact that Sean Davis hasn't participated much in OTAs in practice, and he's shoehorned himself into the conversation here. Look, we already know who the starters are, and Edmonds and Davis, and then beyond that, you have Marcus Allen, who's probably going to be the number 3. If the Steelers keep just 4 safeties, it's likely down to Dangerfield and Kelly. This is a huge opportunity for Cameron Kelly to show off just exactly how great he's been in practice. And furthermore, I know Austin and I are both going to be rooting for him because while I have nothing against Jordan Dangerfield, this guy was one of the standout performers in the Alliance of American Football. As we already know, probably the single best defensive performance in any game played during that 8-week stretch where he had three interceptions and I believe was it a fourth turnover or fumble recovery? Regardless, he was the man, and he has an opportunity to show out once again and make a good first impression for the coaches on the field during an actual game. So Cameron Kelly's my number 2 pick.
Interesting. I actually forgot about Kelly. That was really bad. I would have had Kelly on my list. I just, for some reason, I skipped him. That was a really good pick right there. But for me, my number 2 I had on my list was Ola Adeni. I'm very excited to see Adeni again. Last preseason, he was a monster, and then, And then in the training camp, he was a monster as well. And then for one game, the one Chargers game, he looked like he was doing pretty solid where he got to apply pressure for like one snap. So, and with injuries to both Sutton Smith, which is unknown at this time, it might not be super big, and then Bud Dupree, which Bud Dupree probably wasn't playing anyway, though. Him and Tazar Skipper and J.T. Jones are going to be getting a lot of snaps at these linebacker positions because they're probably going to be rotating too, which side they're playing on to see which guy fits better where, how they're going to perform as a left outside linebacker, as a right outside linebacker. But for me, I'm focusing on Ola Adeni because I want to see more out of him. I want to see him prove again that there's a reason why he was kept as an undrafted free agent on the roster. I wanted to see him improve on how he did last preseason and try and find himself a path onto the roster again, which he should have it already. But I want to just keep seeing more, keep having him build on his performance. So I'm going to be watching Ola Adeni in this game, and that's really it. So that was my number 2. So who's your number 3?
My third pick in this draft is going to be tight end Xavier Grimble. So we already know that Vance McDonald's a starting tight end, and the number 3 tight end you could have really picked, and maybe you will pick someone like, Zach Gentry or Christian Scotland Williamson, but I'm going with the guy that's supposedly the standout number 2 tight end in Xavier Grimble. So Grimble was a guy, as we already know, that's been the number 3 tight end the last few years, and Grimble has been up and down, but especially after that last play in Denver this past season, he's been down. But the Steelers have shown renewed faith in him by not going after really any tight ends in the draft or free agency and allowing him to basically slide in as the number 2. And while he has improved as a blocker, we know that he can show things as a receiver, but he's just never been a consistent player in this regard. So, as far as Xavier Grimble goes, he's not playing for a job in the sense that he's competing with anyone on the roster. He's competing right now with players that aren't on the roster. And what I mean by that is guys that could be cut by other teams. The Steelers could, swoop in and try to pick up to maybe push him or take his job. Or they might try to trade for someone because we know Kevin Colbert likes to be active during this time of the preseason. So for Grimble, what's really important about this game is he needs to show that the Steelers were right in trusting him to be the number 2 tight end. He doesn't need to go out there, catch 5 passes for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. He doesn't even have to catch a ton of passes. He doesn't even need to catch like 3 passes to me. If he catches 2 passes for 20 yards, I'm honestly not super worried about it. I'm mostly concerned about his ability as a blocker and honestly just being more refined in what we've already seen from him already, and obviously ball security. So the big thing for Grimble here is show that the Steelers' faith in you was not for nothing. Make sure that the way you play will show the Steelers that they don't need to get someone else. So that's why Xavier Grimble is my number 3 pick. Let's move on to the second part of round 3. So give me your third pick.
So my third pick is the only guy with a sack in training camp so far, and that's Isaiah Buggs. Isaiah Buggs was my second favorite pick out of this draft class. I thought he was a steal. I thought it was a really good pick, and got him for a pretty value pick. And so I'm assuming he's going to be playing a lot along the defensive line here. With obviously you're going to be resting your starter. So Buggs has a lot to prove here. I guess not a lot, but we just talked about how there's no defensive lineman behind Stephon Tuitt on the roster. If you were to get rid of Tuitt or Tuitt got hurt, it wouldn't be a great situation. It'd be like, 2015 where Ricardo, I can't even remember the name.
It's
like
Ricardo
Lewis and L.T. Walton had to start because the defensive line was so banged up with Cameron Hayward out for the year and just so many defensive lineman injuries. I want to see that Isaiah Buggs could possibly dethrone Tyson Alualu, who's a really good run stopper. And the name I was thinking of was Ricardo Matthews. I don't know why I was thinking Ricardo Lewis. I think that's a receiver for the Browns or something, but it was a really rough year that year. But regardless, Isaiah Buggs, I'm trying to look to see if he could maybe dethrone the backup either nose tackle position where Dan McCullers currently holds it pretty tight because the Steelers really love him, and Tyson Alualu, who's a really, really good run stuffer on the defensive line behind Cameron Hayward and Stephon Tuitt. So I'm trying to see what he can do here because I feel like he's going to be impressive. I feel like he's going to be a guy that's going to stand out after this game, and I feel like he's going to be a player to watch because I feel like he's going to actually have a pretty solid game here because I think he's better than where he was drafted personally. And I think he's going to stand out along the defensive line, and he's going to get a good amount of snaps here too. So I'm looking out for Isaiah Buggs as my third choice. So what is your fourth player to watch?
All right, kicking off round 4, I'm going to go with the quarterback Mason Rudolph. Now, you could probably talk about either him or Dobbs, or quite honestly, maybe even Devlin Hodges, because Hodges is playing for a job on a different roster. But look, Mason Rudolph, we've talked about it ad nauseum over the offseason. I mean, at least Austin and I have. I know we really haven't produced many episodes the past couple months, but it would just be us regurgitating the same information that Mason Rudolph, this is huge for him. This needs to be the year that he takes over the number 2 quarterback job. Look, nothing against Mason or Joshua Dobbs. I think he's been solid as a backup, better than I expected going into the preseason last year. But the fact of the matter is, Austin, we know Mason Rudolph was taken with a round 1 grade from the Steelers. Quarterbacks don't sit for more than a year usually these days when they have round 1 grades. Now, the Steelers have a unique situation here, but the fact of the matter is you really want to see Mason Rudolph overtake a guy like Josh Dobbs, a 4th-round quarterback, when you've got a guy in Rudolph who you thought was a first-round talent. So now reports are that Rudolph got out to a faster start than Dobbs, but they've kind of come back he's come back to level the playing field a bit. So the game is where we really want to see the big difference from year 1 to year 2 with Rudolph. How is he reading the field? Now Dobbs can escape pressure and he can make plays with his legs. He's got that cannon arm. Rudolph hasn't really pushed the ball down the field a lot. He doesn't have great mobility. For him, it's going to be about precision passing, being able to get the ball quick and efficiently out of his hands, and being able to make his reads. That's really what I'm going to be looking for with Mason Rudolph, is how quickly and how efficiently is he going to be making his reads, because that was one of his main struggling points last season when it came to the preseason. So Mason Rudolph, I'm watching very closely. I expect big things out of you in this preseason, especially in this game. So please don't disappoint me. Let's see some big things from you today, kiddo. So who's your 4th pick?
So for my 4th pick, I'm going to shift to my first offensive pick, and that's going to be Chukwuma Okorafor. I expect him to get some starting snaps here. Probably going to be seeing a lot of rotation at that right tackle spot and seeing some guys play in weird spots. I want to see how the second-year player can do in a starting role, how he could actually perform again. Because I felt like last preseason, I don't really remember seeing him all too much. He didn't even get that much snaps. But something I'm really looking for is I want a really good performance, because something that could happen here is the Steelers could trade away one of their tackles. If they decide that they like all of them, because, I mean, they seem to like Zach Banner, and Zach Banner has done well in camp. Chukwuma Okorafor has done pretty well as a swing tackle, but just not proven as a starter. And Matt Filer is a proven starter, and then they got Gerald Hawkins as the 4th guy or third, or the backup third, whatever. Regardless, if Chukwuma Okorafor can perform well here and continue this from going forward in the preseason as a starter, it could allow the Steelers to trade one of their tackles, whether they decide that maybe they want to trade Zach Banner or make even a big move and just let Chukwuma Okorafor start. Because I know you've, not the trade part of this, but you've thought that Chukwuma Okorafor could be propelled into a starting role over Matt Filer. We've talked about this before. And that would be interesting. If they deem Chukwuma Okorafor ready, because he was just raw. He had all the skill. He didn't have the skills, I'm sorry. He had the physical traits to be a starting right tackle in the NFL, at the NFL level. And if he could prove that, the Steelers kind of have 3 pretty solid right tackles that they like. Or I think Zach Banner has played both sides, but that's besides the point. So I'm looking for Chukwuma Okorafor in this game to prove that he could play. He could be a starter. But, I mean, you can't really do that in preseason. It's just the start of it. For preseason game 1, I want to see some good things out of him against probably not so great backup Buccaneers defensive line and pass rushers. So I'm looking for Chukwuma Okorafor in this game as my 4th guy. Who is your 5th guy?
My final pick, I was really struggling with this because there's several other guys I'd like to talk about. But last and certainly not least is going to be cornerback Brian Allen. So I thought about going Artie Burns here, but I'm actually going with Brian Allen here because the fact of the matter is, the way it looks right now with Artie Burns having another pretty solid training camp as he seems to always do, Brian Allen is the guy that we've talked about. Looks like the odd man out. And we said it seemed like the only clear path that he had to a roster spot, not even necessarily clear, was if he played safety. And he hasn't been playing any safety whatsoever. I don't believe he has any practice squad eligibility left. He might, but regardless, him making the roster is now pretty much reliant on him making plays and maybe even other guys not being able to show up, guys like Artie Burns. We already talked about if they're keeping 6 guys, there's pretty much 5 that are locked in. So it's down to that last spot being Artie Burns or Brian Allen. These 2 guys are, they're different pedigree. Allen was a 5th rounder and Burns was a 1st rounder, but Allen was the guy who was supposed to be the high potential guy, a former receiver, a guy who was big, physical, speedy, just, raw, a former wide receiver. He hasn't made the plays that have translated yet. In fact, he actually regressed last year's preseason, but he's had a couple nice practices. I wouldn't say he's been as good as Artie Burns in training camp from what I've seen, but he's had a couple standout practices, and this is going to be his opportunity. Now more than ever, he needs a turnover or 2. He needs a couple of highlights and flashy plays from here on out from every game. This is where you can make that start. It's not unheard of for guys to come out of nowhere and after struggling in training camp or not doing so great compared to other players. This is still where you can still start here make some plays and make it onto the roster. It's not over for Brian Allen, but I think him compared to everyone else that I've looked at, if these other guys don't make plays this week, I think I'm not going to say it's over for Brian Allen, but the door shuts faster for him than anyone else. So I'm going with Brian Allen as my 5th selection in the draft. So, Austin, let's wrap up the draft. Who do you got for your 5th and final selection?
Oh, I was so salty you just picked Brian Allen. Brian Allen was going to be my 5th, but because he's gone, I'm going to take a risk here because he might not even play, but I choose Deontay Johnson. He's injured right now. I'm projecting that he's going to be healthy enough to play and that he's going to be playing this game. So I think it's just going to be exciting to see what this new wide receiver room could do. I really could have picked any of the wide receivers that were healthy. Because I thought about Dante Moncrief, but I feel like Dante Moncrief is not going to play anymore because his finger is dislocated and he just left again. So I ruled him out. I could have picked James Washington, which actually James Washington was next on my list. But I'm going to go with Deontay Johnson because he's a bigger question mark than the other wide receivers. I feel like being a rookie, he's got to prove himself against some NFL cornerbacks, even if they're not the starters. I'm just going to be excited to watch him and see what he can do in this game. That is, if he plays, and I hope he plays. But yeah, really, it's just he's going to be trying to etch his spot, trying to get some snaps over James Washington. I feel like that's going to be a battle here because James Washington is currently the starting Z wide receiver, and that could easily be dethroned at the moment because James Washington had a lackluster season last year. He actually led the NFL in, I guess it's the opposite. He was last in the NFL in catch percentage, which is not all his fault. Some of it is because of Ben overthrows, but he was the worst in the NFL at it, so he didn't have that great of a year, and he was on the field for a lot more snaps than you would think. So I'm going to be looking for Deontay Johnson this game to try and show that he could maybe come in and play that Z spot and try and take away snaps from Deontay Johnson here, or he could be the next man up if there's an injury to Juju or Dante Moncrief. So I have Deontay Johnson as my 5th and final draft pick.
All right, so to wrap things up, I had Deontay Spencer, the wide receiver, cornerback / safety Cameron Kelly, tight end Xavier Grimble, quarterback Mason Rudolph, and cornerback Brian Allen. That was my team. Austin had Devin Bush, the linebacker, Ola Adeni, the edge rusher, outside linebacker, defensive lineman Isaiah Buggs, offensive tackle Chukwuma Okorafor, and wide receiver Deontay Johnson. I'm thinking maybe we could post this to social media and just see what people think just for fun. But what do you think, Austin? I kind of like this segment. Seems like fun.
Yeah, it was pretty fun. I liked it. It was pretty good.
Now, you and I both had 10 players. I'm just going to say right now, I think we were kind of thinking on different wavelengths here because you didn't pick any of the other 5 guys I was thinking about.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay, so I had Mason Rudolph on my list, Brian Allen, and Deontay Spencer. So I actually had 3 of your guys. Okay,
so we were at least thinking somewhat similarly. Now, as far as the other guys that I had on my list that we did not get to, I thought the guy I was really contemplating putting in my number 5 spot was Gerald Hawkins, and I think you know why. He had a couple nice practices, but has since struggled, and it just a year away from football and barely playing much over 2 of the last 3 years. It's probably taken a huge toll on him, and even if he can rebound a bit, it's looking like a long shot for him to make the roster. He really needs to have a good performance on Friday. Oh, yeah, no doubt. Was that the only one that you didn't mention? I feel like you should just go through the rest of your list that you didn't get to. I was going to say that was the main one I was wrestling with, but I also had Zach Banner, but I felt like Hawkins was a bigger move than Banner, just because Banner has jumped him. I had Artie Burns, but I felt like Brian Allen was a bigger name, or a name that matched this list better. I also had Marcus Allen, who we really haven't heard a lot from him after we thought he was going to be the opening day nickelback, at least in camp. Haven't heard a lot from him. I also had the one name I was missing was the Ulysses Gilbert III, who I was actually planning on putting in relatively early in this list, but I decided against it because even if he performs badly or really well in this game on Friday, I feel like it doesn't change a whole lot right now. You need to see 2 consistent performances from him before something changes. So I felt like whatever you see now, it either needs to be these guys need to have an immediate impact, or their play means a lot going forward. So I felt like I was making picks more so for stuff that needs to happen now, kind of, if that makes any sense.
That's fair. So for me, the only 2 that I didn't mention that didn't overlap were yours. I actually kind of mentioned one. James Washington would have been next on my list, but I felt like Deontay Johnson should have came first because James Washington's in control right now. It's really Johnson's got to prove himself that he can jump Washington. But I had Washington next because I felt like he needed to maintain his spot. And then I had number 9 is Mark Barron because he's a new toy. Just like a new toy, trying to see what he's going to do and see how he plays and stuff. And that was it.
Alrighty. So anything else that really needs to be covered? I mean, we covered a whole bunch of players. I mean, we don't think a ton of starters are going to play. Winning and losing really does not matter at this point. Who do you think is going to start? I feel like it's going to be Josh Dobbs, and how much do you think we're going to see of the 3 quarterbacks? Because I imagine, Roethlisberger's not going to play.
I think we're going to see 2 quarters Josh Dobbs, 1 quarter Devlin Hodges, and 1 quarter Mason Rudolph. And that's how it's going to go. What do you think?
I'm actually in complete agreement here, but I think you mean like Dobbs will take the first half, Rudolph will take the third quarter, and then Hodges will take the fourth, right? Or do you mean Hodges will take the third and Rudolph will take the fourth?
For this game, I'm going to have Hodges take the third and Mason Rudolph take the fourth. I think they're going to want to see Mason Rudolph in, trying to see him in the last quarter, trying to see how he could perform with little time left in, maybe, not necessarily comeback situations, but, at the end of game situation.
You want to see him operate the 2-minute offense, kind of, is what you're getting at.
Yep.
Yeah, I could see that. Very interesting, but I think it'll be reversed the next week. So I think Rudolph will get the 2 quarters next week, kind of like what we saw last year.
Yes, sir.
All right, so I think that just about does it as far as previewing the game. Is there anything else that we're missing here? May get to see. I don't know if Terrell Austin will be in the booth, but they were talking about. We already know that he's supposed to be up there, and he's going to be kind of the replay guru, if you will. So I wonder if we'll get to see him doing that. That's really the only other thing that's coming to mind right now.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to be looking out to see if there's an offensive pass interference challenge in this game, like we saw in the Falcons-Broncos preseason opener. And then other than that, just on the Buccaneers side, I'm very interested to see Griffin. I feel like Griffin has a chance to jump Jameis Winston as the starter, to be honest. I really like Griffin. I've liked him since last year and I feel like Jameis Winston's just been trending downward and downward and downward. So I'm going to watch. I'm assuming Ryan Griffin's going to be playing. So I'm going to be watching out for him on the Buccaneers side, and that's really it. Ryan Griffin and Devin White.
It's not a good sign when your quarterback says, I can go back to playing baseball if this doesn't work out. That's not really what you want him to be saying.
No.
All right, then. I think that does it then. Okay, so let's jump into a little bit of NFL news. First and foremost, the first episode of Hard Knocks featuring the Oakland Raiders has aired tonight. Obviously, I haven't seen it because I think it's done airing now, but there was that hilarious bit earlier about Antonio Brown's kids asking where Ben Roethlisberger was.
Yeah, that was great. That was really funny. I saw the video and it made me laugh.
Besides that, I don't really think there's a whole lot going on with Hard Knocks. I'm sure there'll be a lot of talking points going forward, but I got nothing on it right now. Tight end Niles Paul, who was cut by the 49ers, the 29-year-old, has retired, so another option for the Steelers possibly to upgrade at that position goes by the wayside. So another thorn in the side of the Steelers. And Cowboys running back Ezekiel Elliott has stated that he's not going to play without a new deal. We said it before, but it's nice when it's not happening to us.
Oh, yeah, it's great. This is a little different. He could get fined the heck out of for this because he's technically under contract still. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Cowboys play this, if they're going to try and appease him and just not fine him or waive the fines, or if they're just going to try. I think they're going to – they seem to be on the attack. I feel like they're going to fine the heck out of him and just say, yeah, fine, don't play, because that seems like that's how it's going to go. But it's interesting to see it play out with someone else, as you said.
So how do you think this is going to work? I'm trying to pull up the Cowboys schedule right now, so I'm trying to see kind of like what a scenario could be with them if they start out slow. How do you see this one breaking down? Like, who's going to win this battle?
Whether it be Ezekiel Elliott or Cowboys, I feel the Cowboys have all the have all the ammo here. I mean, he's under contract, and he's not going to be able to play again if he doesn't return to the Cowboys here. So it's just like the Cowboys are going to win out. I think because they also signed Alfred Morris, and Alfred Morris was averaging like 5 yards a carry last year, and was actually doing solid for the 49ers. So he's made his return, and I think they're going to be okay. I think running back is a position that I stereotypically just do not like anyway. So I think they're going to be fine.
Okay, I get that, but I think the difference between Alfred Morris and James Conner is quite different, i.e. the drop-off from Bell to Conner is much smaller than it is from Ezekiel Elliott to Alfred Morris. I know you just kind of talked him up, but I don't think Alfred Morris is anything that is really going to be that big of a difference. The fact of the matter is the Cowboys' best chance at winning the Super Bowl is with Ezekiel Elliott. That's the way I see it. And unless if he's there, I think it's going to be tough. Now, I would like to point out that their first 3 games of the season, they should win all 3 of them pretty convincingly. They host the Giants to start the season. If they lose against the Giants week 1 and then manage to lose because they're at Washington week 2, if they lose those games, I think that Ezekiel Elliott wins, even if the running game itself is not really the reason for it, because you can't start 0-2 in your division and lose one of those games at home. So the key will be how the Cowboys perform early, but I think they will be just fine because they also have a week 3 game against the Dolphins, so they really should be 3-0 out of the gate.
Oh yeah, they got a pretty easy schedule to start the year, huh?
Yeah, it gets harder pretty quick. They're in New Orleans week 4, so that's going to be difficult. Then they host Green Bay, which should be a toss-up. They're at the New York Jets, which I feel like that's going to be a win, but that could be a toss-up. And then, of course, they have the Eagles and whatnot. Schedule gets a little tougher later on, but it's certainly easy out of the gates. So time will tell.
Yeah. No, I feel like it's going to be confusing for people. I feel like people are going to think the Cowboys are the best thing since like sliced bread after the first 3 games, but we'll see.
Alrighty, anything else to cover right now?
No, I think we're good.
Alrighty, well, ladies and gentlemen, we're finally here. Steelers football just 3 days away, and by the time you'll be listening to this, probably just right around 50 or less hours until kickoff. And yes, it's the preseason. Yes, it's not going to be super entertaining, but always remember that these guys out here are playing for their dreams. For many of them, it's the last time they'll have an opportunity to show out and play football on the biggest and best stage. So remember, they're giving it their all, even if they're not always as good as some of the other guys that we're used to seeing in the regular season. That's something that I remind myself as I'm watching the preseason and the lower quality of football. Just remember that these guys are giving it their all for what could be the final time for a lot of them. And of course, guys like Victor Cruz and Isaac Redmond, guys come out of nowhere and can play important parts. So you never know who the next preseason superstar that turns into the next big thing could be. So that's all the more reason to watch. So Austin, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm glad to get this one done. It feels good to finally have something to talk about besides news and notes. We'll actually have a game to watch, a Steelers game to watch. And, of course, the NFL preseason week 1, not the Hall of Fame game. That's its own week. The preseason itself kicks off on Thursday, so we're just a couple days away from that. So we're finally here, man. We're going to have football every week up until the Super Bowl now.
Yeah, man, it's going to be exciting. We're almost back to real football.
Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, thank you as always for joining us on the Stronger Than Steel podcast. You all have a terrific night.
Have a good night.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our website listed in the description below.